welcome to Body Bags. My name is Jeremy Geiger. I'm a co-owner of City of First Cremation and Funeral Service, and sitting with me is my business partner, Kimberly Rose. Today's episode, we want to kind of talk about burials. When we talk about burials, I don't necessarily mean cremation burials. I mean more along the thoughts of traditional earth burials with caskets. So, here in Indiana, we've got a couple of options when we talk about actual burials. What we're probably 85% comfortable with would be an earth burial, where we dig a hole in the ground. We use a outer burial container or a burial vault. Not all cemeteries require that. That's just a specific to each cemetery on their own. And then the casket's placed in that burial vault. It's sealed up and it's covered with dirt. Sometimes we see a marker, whether it's upright or it's a flat marker out there. But there's other opportunities to bury caskets that you may not be aware of. So the other types of burials of caskets would be entombments, such as a mausoleum. Mm-hmm. There are different styles of mausoleums. In our local area, we see mausoleums that are single spaces, so it would hold exactly one casket. There are companion spaces, so where it would be two. Sometimes they're side by side. Sometimes they go in feet first, and then the next one comes in head first. So then they're head to head. Outside of those, maybe public mausoleums, you could do something privately. So you would need to check with your cemetery where you may own a space. If you don't own the space, you're going to obviously want to have this conversation as you're shopping around. You may have the interest of wanting your own personal mausoleum. You can get those as individual above grounds, or you can have a great big upright mausoleum that's kind of a building per se, has an entryway. It can hold up to 3 to 6 individuals on the smaller scale. If you've got the money, absolutely, you can build your own big personal mausoleum and put your family.
That'd be like a family estate.
And that's some of the things that we would have seen traditionally in the years past. When you go out and explore the cemeteries, you may see the big family headstone that says Beards, big family name. And there's no other names on there. But as you're walking around in that area, that's when you're starting to notice, well, hey, there's Helen Beardstone. That makes sense in the Beard area. There's Mary and there's John. Oh, this is the whole family section. So It was easy for them at that point to maybe mark their family area with a large monument, and then everybody kind of got those smaller footstones. So yeah, you can do that mausoleum thing as well for your family needs as well. Let's talk about some of the green side of burials. As I've mentioned, maybe some of our other episodes about maybe the Indiana laws not being conscious of some of our green options or benefits that are out there. So maybe another form of burial would be that green burial, and it's something that, like I mentioned in an episode prior, that our state maybe is not conscious of, with like the alkaline hydrolysis or just the greener side of cremations, the biocremation. Indiana, we have a couple of spots where we can do what is considered a green burial. We have a location in Frankfort at a city cemetery. They have a section designated for this. There are things that you have to conform to meet their requirements for that burial. So if you're going to be embalmed, you have to use embalming fluids that are green acceptable. So it's not going to have formaldehyde. It's not going to have glutaraldehyde. It's really just a cleansing of the vessels internally. You're kind of expelling the blood and things, and then it's infused with more fragrances than what our typical embalming solutions are, because there is no preservation to that body at that point. We're just trying to control odors and get them to their final resting place. Another thing they are going to put on you as a requirement is how the body is brought to the cemetery. So it could be put in a shroud, or we could be looking at a casket that has no metal or varnish to it. It would be strictly what we would say maybe a pine box. It's going to be glue and dowel rods. So there aren't many options in our state for that. So our funeral directors, we are aware of the green burial side of things. We may not be the best resources for you because our state doesn't really explore that avenue the greatest that it could be for us. So nobody's really jumping in and trying to make this a better viable option for those that are interested in it. Another neat idea to this green burial is a process that's been developed. We talked about the parting stones, where they take the cremated remains and we turn them into stones. There's another company out there that kind of did something around the same time frame as them. It's called organic reduction or composting. It is nothing we do here in our state. I only know of a couple of states that allow this. It is a really intriguing process. It definitely spiked my interest. I hope one day I get to travel to an area where a facility would let me in to see how this process is. I've got a lot of curiosities on how this works for them. But this body reduction and composting is exactly what it sounds. Think of your Tupperware totes or Rubbermaid totes, but it's commercial size for a full human body. And they're placing you in there with composting materials. And they're letting that body naturally break down in the soils. They're going in multiple times a week and they're turning that body. They're working the material over. And at the end of the process, they've got all of this nutrient-rich soil to be able to give back to you as a family.
So you think we could go visit that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be an opportunity. We got to drive. We're going to have to go on a road trip.
Where is it?
So we could go to Florida. Okay. We could go to Washington or Oregon. Those states also accept it.
Interesting.
It is starting to move. It's something people are really becoming passionate about, and it's really interesting to see because it's on that green side of things. We know that our environment's maybe not the greatest, but we're getting back almost 10 cubic yards of composted soil. I know I don't need that much soil if I had a garden at home that I was tending to. Also, some of these people, they're living in apartments, so they don't need that. So these companies, they're working with the National Park Services and other local agricultural groups to offer up an opportunity to utilize this soil, so then it's being put into our environment, so it is giving back and enriching the ground for growth and better produce and stuff that would be out there. So that's kind of a newer thought. I know it's kind of alarming. Watching some of the information and reading of it was pretty intriguing to me. I've had some family members that live in Florida reach out to me and ask me what my thoughts or concerns with it are. I love the idea. I think it's a great thing. Maybe some of my concerns on it on a business aspect is, where is this business operating? What are these odors that are coming from there? Because on the funeral home side of things, we obviously want to stop decomposition and we want to limit odors because we don't want families to experience that. The cremation side of it, typically there may be a little bit of odor, but we're getting them processed quick enough where that odor's not sticking around too terribly long. And if we've got a decomp, bless your heart, the coroner has helped us out. We're going to get you cremated that day so we don't have to
So I have a
suffer
question.
that. Yeah.
When you donate your body to science, it's free.
Correct.
So when we're...
Organic composting?
Are you giving your body to them?
Absolutely not.
Okay, so it's not free.
There's a fee to it. So they give you the opportunity, you can have the dirt.
Okay.
Outside of having the dirt, then they do smaller portions. So if you maybe want to buy a 5 or an 8 pound bag or a 3 pound bag because you've got some house plants, or you do a little bit of gardening, that way you can incorporate it into your current plants that you have at home. It's a pretty unique process. Like I was sharing before you had your question, I think some of the concerns would be, how are these bodies... I know they're going to be handled respectfully, even though we know turning them, composting is not very respectful. I mean, it's kind of... We've got to get in there, and there's a lot of turning and moving and all that, but it's done in a respectful manner. I'm curious on the identification process, how they're tracking that through their composting, so they know, hey, that's John, this is Betty, there's Margaret. And
there's got to be divisions.
There needs to be, and I know they're doing probably similar to us on the cremation side by giving identification tags and all that. But
chain of custody.
I just know sometimes I'm not the best getting the right lid back on the right container at home. And if I had 4 of them out, it's not going to be good for me. So I'd be the guy who'd be very slow there, working one body at a time, one lid off at a time, and telling all of my coworkers, don't get near me. I can't get your lid mixed up. So those are some of those neat ideas on the natural, organic, green burial side of things. Do you have any green burial ideas, experiences, questions that you've experienced? No? Okay. So I want to talk about other cultures that maybe utilize burial like we do here in the United States. So the Europeans, they also utilize embalming, and they utilize earth burial. I think that's where a lot of our maybe traditions and rituals come from. Obviously, their religions are brought with them when they came to develop our country. So we follow a lot of their rituals and things like that. But our shapes of caskets are a lot different than what we would see in Europe or maybe even New Zealand for that matter. What we call them in our industry, or at least what I call them, is a toenail casket. They're that diamond shaped or coffin shaped casket. They're more body forming and fitting to that person versus what we're used to in the United States, where we kind of want them to have a little bit of elbow room inside that casket so they don't seem cramped and squished in there. Other cultures, like the Asians, they like cremation, and it's because their population's so large that land is very sacred to them. So if you are going to be buried, you better be a very high up royal or high up in the military to be able to get those accolades. Even if you're wealthy, doesn't always mean that you've got the entitlement there in their culture for a burial. It would still be a cremation. Their cremation over in Asia is over 90%. And here in the United States, we're in that 60% range, and to think of 30% more of people would be accepting that, it's kind of interesting to fathom, because how is this cremation done for them? A lot of times we experience the cremation just as a direct cremation where there's just paperwork done and it's no services or anything, no rituals. But these other cultures, there's a ceremony that goes involved with it. They're maybe dressing and bathing and doing their hair and makeup to get them ready for this cremation, for that ceremony. It's not just a form of disposition in their eyes. It's a process. And that's one thing I feel that we're passionate about here at City of First is we understand the direct side of cremation and that there's the need for it, but we also want to give you that opportunity to be involved with that cremation with us.
We want it to be a process.
A process.
With you.
Yeah, we want them to experience those finalities with them, whether it's helping get a sock on them because we got them dressed. They couldn't handle maybe the thought of putting their shirt on them, but they're okay with putting socks on them. Or it's even just coming in and seeing them in their alternative container and saying goodbye to them.
Putting a blanket on them.
We've had a lot of them tuck them away and put the blanket on them, say their goodbye. I think it even helps families that they'll tell you at the time of they have no interest of touching the screen to input their information because that's too final for them. But then it gets in there and we're in the heat of that action and they're going, I want to put their name in. That's all I want to do is just put the name in. So to make sure that as a consumer, ask these questions with your funeral home and your funeral directors that you would like to be as actively involved as they'll allow you to be. It's important that you are. We've gone too far away from being outcasted from what death is. Death was an everyday part of our life a long, long time ago, and now we just kind of turn our eye at it and it's not going to happen to me. It's not going to be my family member that dies. But you don't want to end up with that kind of experience. So always ask questions as you're working with your funeral home or funeral director, whether it's cremation or earth burial. You always have an opportunity to see that loved one. They don't always have to be embalmed. Even on the earth burial side, our state law says that we only have to worry about embalming as if it's a public visitation or a funeral service. We do a lot of our... You can go ahead. So we want to talk about, we were talking about the opportunities of the embalming. It's not required in Indiana as a state law. It's only required if we're looking at something as a public visitation or a public ceremony with the casket open. So we can still go to a church or have a public funeral at the funeral home with the casket closed in a sealed casket, and they're not embalmed. Now the family got to see them and say goodbye. We closed it before the general public got there. We may open it up again before they go home or before we go to the cemetery as well. So embalming's not always required. And I think there's a lot of myths behind that. I think there also is the feeling of, I can't have a funeral service and be cremated. I can be cremated and taken to the funeral service in an urn, but I can't be in a casket and cremated. Absolutely you can. These types of dispositions are almost interchangeable in my eyes. It's just the types of way to dispose of the body at the end is how I see that final disposition. So we can embalm you, have a regular funeral service in a casket, whether you purchase it, rent it. And then once that service is concluded, we would bring you back to the funeral home versus going to the cemetery, and we could cremate you in the rental casket insert, or you stay in your actual casket for that cremation. I've used metal caskets to cremate before. Obviously, you're not getting the metal casket back. They stay in there. We take the lid off, and they go in that bottom portion of the casket. They're cremated, and then it's terrible experience. Then that's all brought out, and then we actually retrieve the bones from inside that metal casket, and then we're having to crush up said casket to end up ultimately disposing of it. So most funeral homes will charge you.
I didn't know that you could do that?
Yeah, we always charged an extra fee if it was a metal casket because there was a lot more work for us. Didn't happen very often. Then they do cremation caskets that it's maybe an MDF or particle board material with a beautiful veneer over top of it. You would think it's a solid oak, cherry, or walnut, but it's not. It's a casket designed to get you through that ceremony and use as a cremation container. We will burn up those solid cherries, walnuts, and oaks. I'm not a fan of it. It's expensive. More power to you if that's what you want to do, but it's a longer cremation process for you. It's a hotter cremation process that we see, and it's a longer ordeal that we end up going through, and there's more material that we're sifting for when we're going to prepare to pulverize these cremated remains to give you back your ash. We're looking for all those bolts, nuts, lags. It's a lot of work. We prefer on those cremations to be in a cardboard box, but we do what is needed for the family. It's not what's needed for us, and that's what's always important for you as a consumer out there that's experiencing a loss. You're sitting with your funeral home or funeral director. Express your feelings. It's extremely important. The funeral director is looking for those clues because there's going to be things they're going to be able to offer you or that they've experienced themselves and offer it as a suggestion.
Most oftentimes that cardboard box is included in the funeral home's basic price.
Absolutely.
But you can choose whatever you want to.
Yep.
You're obviously going to pay for it.
Yep.
But it's included because that's what they want to use.
Right. So other cultures with burial, I mentioned in the previous episode about checking out YouTube. This is one of these keywords and phrases to look for. Do your search. Sky burials, water burials. It is a really unique experience. These are usually tribes that live, or I want to say maybe they're not Indian. They're groups of individuals that live in mountainous regions. They're kind of I don't want to say cult. They are tribes. They are kind of monks, monasteries. They're very spiritual individuals that are living in these areas. But they do these ceremonies called sky and water burials. I will go into a little bit of detail to kind of save you a little bit of hunting. So these sky burials, they do several of them at a time. It isn't like there's one death that occurs and they do this. Typically they'll do 3 or 4 at a time. And they have a ceremonial spot on the mountain that they go to. And I kind of think of it as like the Aztecs or the Mayans, where like maybe there's like a sacrificial table and there's the blood and all that. I'm
thinking of a water balloon, so.
Yeah, it's kind of similar. The sky burial, there's a table. It's a stone table, and there's stones that have been blessed by their priests, and they are defleshing the body, and there are birds. They're very aware of these processes, these rituals and procedures. And as you're watching this video, you'll see there might be just a couple of birds flying around, and then
circling.
The rest of them are on the mountain range and they're watching for the right opportunity. The others are just kind of circling or looking through to see when things are kind of ready for them. Okay. So these birds, they know that they can approach these bodies to a certain point, but if they're still in that process, they don't want to be too close. You'll see them in some of the videos kind of shoo the birds away and they get back, but they'll deflesh the person and they leave it on that table, and then they'll back away from it and the birds will then come in and consume the flesh and the tissue. I mean, it's almost like what you would think is piranhas and something in the water. Like it just disappears really quick, and there's a lot of them. And then the next thing you know, you're seeing like
Just
them
bone.
picking at the bones, making sure that they're gone and clean. And they let it go. There's prayers, there's singing that's going on.
I like it.
It's a really unique experience. For as morbid as it sounds, it's probably the most human feeling to it. Like, at least in my eyes, I mean, I think
I like
of the
natural.
I think of the caveman, like the Neanderthal thing. Like there's a loss. I don't think it's oh, you died. Well, I'm going this way now. I think
You're going back to. I mean, you're feeding the
circle of life.
The circle of life. Yeah.
Circle of life. So then once the birds are done, then they collect the bones up and they place them in a cotton linen, and they wrap them up, and then they place them in their actual entombment cemetery along the mountain range where the rest of their history is. It's kind of their own burial grounds. Really neat experience. You'll have to have your password and approved on YouTube to be able to view these things. They're going to want to make sure you're 18. It's a pretty neat experience. I would love to be a part of witnessing some of that process because it is just really neat. So another form with that same group of individuals and beliefs is the water burial side of things. So I mentioned they're in a mountainous region. Well, it's going to rain and snow, so there's going to be a stream. So water's going to come into play with their lives a lot. So they kind of do the same exact thing. They have a certain area in the river, and they have their table that they work on. I do know that the water burials, they do them individually. It's not like the sky burials where they try to do 3 or 4 at one time. And they will deflesh the body, and they are putting the flesh into the water. And there are turtles that are coming up. There's fish that's around. It's that circle of life. They're giving it back. Now, there is nothing to finish off cleaning off the remains of that bone or skeletal remains. So then they kind of clean it up themselves and back into that linen cloth, fold it up, tie a bow on it or ribbon, whatever it is, and then they place it with the other people of their tribe in the mountain range. So that's another neat idea for burials that we don't typically see in our country.
Interesting.
One thing that I think that we do see a lot in our country is Day of Dead. Our Hispanic cultures, they experience that, and I would love to even go down there to Mexico and to be a part of that. It's interesting to read the articles when that time period is around, where we see they're going in and they're bringing their family member out who's been gone for 10, 12, 15, 20 years, and they're redressing them. They're celebrating their life that they had with them. That's where some of the painting of their face, it's not to scare, it's not a spooky, it's a celebration of their life. It's a different perspective of death. And people in the United States, I feel just they have maybe a doom and gloom to it. And I mean, in reality, it is doom and gloom. We're here just a short period of time and then we're gone. And that period of time that we have, we've got a lot to maybe impact the people around us. But
I'm glad that they made, there was a kid's movie, I'm sure some of you have heard of it, Coco.
Coco, yeah.
I'm glad that they made that.
Yeah.
So the kids can have an idea.
Yeah, and I mean, absolutely. It's that very subtle hint of, hey, death's a very important part of life, and you're going to experience it multiple times in your life. And that's where I was going with it. Here in the United States, I don't feel that it's just, they're here, they're gone, I miss them. There's not much more. And we try to instill with our families that we've got to keep this memory going, keep these stories going. And the only way that happens is by sharing that memory. Well, maybe I think we're leaving something out. It's more than sharing that memory. It's celebrating them. And it's not the one time for their funeral. Doggone. I've had 41 birthdays and they've celebrated every one of them. So why aren't we picking a day, whether it was the day of their funeral, the day of their birthday? We should be celebrating these people. I think that's the mindset we need as a culture, is honoring our loved ones, celebrating the life.
Continuously.
Absolutely. It's more than just a loss. And I think it just makes life easier for us. And it gets others to know about our families and our experiences in our lives. So that kind of concludes the burial side of things. Back to...
I think we should answer somebody's question before we
go. Oh, you want to answer a question? Okay. So I have user WR9BM1QT8J 2 weeks ago. She's seen my laminated bookmark, and I mentioned how big of a fan of King of the Hill I am. She said, I'm assuming your favorite episode of King of the Hill was when he builds their caskets. Unfortunately, it is not my favorite episode. It was a good one, I'll give you that. As you guys have kind of experienced over the last couple months and episodes, that you're catching me as who I am. It's not that, hi, I'm a funeral director, sorry for your loss. It's me, I'm Jeremy, and this is how I am, and these are the things that I think. And my favorite episode is when, I told Kim yesterday, she laughed at me. My favorite episode's when Hank becomes a world-class fisherman and he can't figure out why he's doing so well. He goes to the local bake shop and he tries to get his red wigglers, and they're out of them. And there's a guy standing outside the bait shop and he says, I got some wigglers for you. And he sells him something, and Hank doesn't know what it is. Hank gets out there on the boat and he's by himself and he throws the first cast. Bobber just straight underwater, pole bent down, pulling him in his boat. He's freaking out. Biggest fish he's ever caught in his whole life. Gets a picture of it. Best fishing day ever. Got a whole stringer full. He ends up going back and he's talking to his friends about what his bait is. Come to find out, his bait is crack cocaine.
Oh my God.
Hank's mortified that he was using a narcotic as a fishing bait. So he thought, there's no way these fish are hooked on crack. They just didn't know what it was. So he buys the red wigglers and goes out to try to see if it's just a fluke, or do they still like the red wiggler. He catches not a single fish in there. He ends up running into the guy and he buys more crack to solidify the fish love of the crack.
Oh,
so that was my favorite episode of King of the Hill, because are you freaking kidding me? If you know King of the Hill, and then of course Bobby, he ends up chiming in on it. It's so funny. I love that show. It's one of my favorites. So that kind of is one of the questions. Another question that I had was from Jeff Sexton. It was more of a joke. I appreciate your jokes. I like dad humor. I like mortuary humor. I don't get to really tell a lot of those other than maybe Kim or my wife and daughter. A couple of my friends hear some of my mortuary jokes. They like them most of the time, I think. But his joke was, at the annual Morticians Conference, there was a contest to see who can make their deceased look the best. And then he followed up with, it was some stiff competition. Laugh out loud. Well, Jeff, I'm going to one-up you, buddy. we got one of my favorite coffee cups, and it says, "I've always wanted a smoking hot body, and there was only one way to get it, and it was with cremation." Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate the good laugh. I do want to end this with one story. As I said before, I'm going to continue to share one of my experiences in funeral service, and I mentioned last one a loss of mine that was pretty tough, and it was more of the removal side of things and my experiences of seeing the deceased. My first experience of an embalming is the one that I want to share with you now. So I was about 16 years old, and I got the opportunity to go on a removal and help with this embalming, and I wasn't real sure what to expect. I always imagined like there's gonna be blood everywhere, there's gonna be vacuum hoses, it's gonna be this crazy thing. So I kind of stood in the room off to the side, trying to stay out of the way, because I kept anticipating like there's gonna be some crazy equipment, there's gonna be something crazy going on here. And it wasn't. It was pretty basic and normal. My first person was an 89-year-old female. She was not very big. She was pretty small, maybe 100, 115 pounds. And we picked her up at the nursing home. She was still very warm, which is a unique experience for a newcomer coming into the industry, because you have the mindset of a body's dead, it's cold.
Right.
It wasn't. She was still warm. The blood that I seen, it wasn't anything close to what I imagined. I expected it to be like Carrie, and the bucket of blood just flies down on him. It wasn't. It was just a small trickle of blood over the shoulder, down the table, into the drain. The embalming machine, the aroma of the chemicals, my nose doesn't work as well as it used to, is because of the exposure of those chemicals. But I could smell the formaldehyde. I could feel the burn of the formaldehyde in my eyes and my sinuses. I could pick up on some of the pininess into the chemical makeup to give it a better smell. There was the small incision that was made. There's blood gently going over the shoulder, down onto the embalming table. I said I kept waiting for there being some kind of big machine. There wasn't. There was just the hum of the embalming machine, which is just a mechanical pump hooked up to a 3-gallon machine, has a tube going to it, and that's injecting down into the carotid artery. It wasn't gruesome at all. And I was so disappointed, because I was expecting this shock and awe and gore, and no wonder why nobody wants to be a funeral director or work at a funeral home. They all think it's extremely morbid. And it wasn't. It was easy, is I guess the best way to put it. Now, not all embalmings go that way. Some of them are very traumatic and very difficult. I'm extremely thankful for the opportunity, how I was slowly brought into the industry. It wasn't my first removal that I'd been on. Yeah, I'd probably made 15, 20 removals before my boss said, "Hey, you want to just stick around and watch this one?" So it was definitely neat to see that I could slowly be brought into it. It wasn't near as what Hollywood or maybe society built it up to be. It was a very dignified thing, and I know all of the places that I've worked and all of the people that I've worked with, every time we are in that back area working with a deceased, it's never been in a disrespectful or distasteful manner. It's always treated with the highest respect, and I've always viewed, and I feel that my colleagues and coworkers and all that have felt that that's going to be me one day on that table, and I would never want to do something that somebody could do back to me in a hurtful manner.
Yeah.
So it's always been such a very honorable, prestigious area to be brought into, allowed to witness and learn from people on embalming and restorative art procedures. So that was my first experience with embalming. It wasn't the greatest for shock and awe factor, but it was a beautiful learning experience. I'm extremely grateful for it. If you've got questions in regards to embalming or cremation, feel free to leave a comment on any of our YouTube videos. I do go back every month and look at all of them to see if there's any other questions that may go on.
I do want to go back to, like, you thought it would be like a crime scene or all Carrie and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, you know, maybe like the closest to a crime scene would be like sometimes the hoses fall off.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
And I think we've had an experience where.
Yeah, what was it? The first or second embalming that we worked together, I ended up squirting, was it table water at you? Did I get
No, it was actual
embalming
fluid.
fluid? Yeah. I mean,
So the mechanism
The
right
cannula?
here, the cannula. It can, sometimes they're not screw tops, sometimes they're just
quick connect where
quick connect where you just push it into the tube and it can pop off, and it popped off and the hose will go pew, pew,
Oh yeah.
and it got me, and
Yeah.
you got to duck real quick.
Yep. You always wear your personal protective attire because you never know what hose is going to end up.
Yeah.
Whether it's a water hose going down the table that gets pinched and then builds up pressure and sprays you. The aspirating hose, boy, I've had that one go terribly. I mean,
That can.
I'll come back. I'll save that story. I'll jot that one down. I have a good one about a college experience for that. But yeah, I always want to be cautious when you're working back there in the prep area because you never know what could happen. So this does conclude our services here at City of First Cremation and Funeral Service. I'm Jeremy, this is Kim, and we thank you for being here today. As always, please like, follow, subscribe to Kokomo Lanterns, and watch our episodes of Body Bags. Thank you guys. Bye.